All right. So welcome to another edition of Truth and Healing with me. I'm Zeke Cohen, City Council District 1, and my good friend, Dr. Melissa Buckley. Hey, Dr.
Oh,
Buckley.
District 1. Hey, Zeke, how you
Also
doing?
District 1, true. My constituent and friend. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. It's going. I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight. How are you doing?
I am great. I am excited. We've got my dad. That should be a treat. We've got Annette March Greer, who's one of my true heroes in Baltimore, just does extraordinary work at Roberta's house. And we've got Lisa Malak, who is one of those people who endlessly enthusiastic, always about our children. And I'm excited for tonight's conversation. Tonight, we're going to dig in and talk about death, which tough topic for a lot of folks, but one that I think as a city and as a country and just as people, I think it's really important to have open, honest conversation about how we die, what we can learn from each other through the process of dying, and just how it makes those of us that survive, how it can make us stronger. And I know that, Melissa, some of your research and some of your work has been about death. You want to share a little bit of that?
Well, so more so about grief. So quickly background, I used to be a clinical director at a program for grieving children in the outskirts of Toronto. It's called the Lighthouse Program for Grieving Children. And so I actually knew about Roberta's House before it ever coming to Baltimore. And the work of Roberta's House, it definitely precedes itself. So my work with children and their loved ones who have experienced death and its sting and the loss of a loved one, coupled with the work that with my research around fatherlessness, which is a loss, and in some ways it's also a death. That for me, being in this space and talking about the gut wrenching feeling of losing something or someone that was of the utmost importance to you, and how that can be complicated. And here in our city, where we know that gun violence is a significant issue, and even if someone hasn't experienced the death of someone, still the feelings around the overall loss, that's why I'm really very much looking forward to our conversation tonight. And my hope is that when people tune in and after the show is over and they're thinking about their own grief and their own loss, and they're thinking about our collective loss as a city, that we will again be able to shift our focus and think about what this looks like in terms of healing.
That's right. And I will also say, unfortunately, we are a city that also continues to struggle with the opioid epidemic, and we lose far, far, far too many people each year to overdose deaths. The way we've talked about this before, but the way we've criminalized addiction and drug use, unfortunately, has not produced any kind of good outcomes. And we are just one of those cities that continues to really struggle with death from overdose. And we also, and this is not, of course, unique to Baltimore, but globally now with the coronavirus, death has become so much more a part of life for so many of us. I don't think there's any family out there that hasn't in some way or another been touched. And we know that this virus has a particular hold for our seniors, for folks who are potentially immunocompromised, but that none of us are immune. And even young people can and have died from the coronavirus. And I think it's just very much, it's a conversation that we tend to try to avoid, but we need to have. And I will say that my own sort of weird quirky upbringing as the child of both a psychiatrist and a clinical social worker whose life's work focused on death and dying. So a lot of really weird, interesting, at times morbid conversations around the dinner table about what does it mean to have a good death versus a bad death, and how do we grieve, and what does it look like to have family there and present, and how can we better support each other as people go through the grieving process. So again, I'm really excited for our show tonight. I do want to remind everyone to please share on Facebook.
Yes.
We want to go get it, Melissa. We want to always thank our sponsors, the T. Rowe Price Foundation, as well as the Family Tree. We are incredibly grateful for their support, as well as for the support of everyone who tunes in and who continues to work toward making Baltimore a healing city. So with that, I want to turn it back to you, and then maybe we bring in our guests.
Sure. We also got to shout out the Healing City Baltimore team, our dynamic team of dedicated folks, shouting them out as well for their ongoing support. When you were talking about your upbringing being somewhat quirky, in a sense, I guess it's quirky and weird for me that I actually love this topic. And it's because of the realness and the rawness of it. And you're right, grief knocks on everybody's door. It just knocked on my door last week. A very, very dear person in my life suddenly died. And as much as I, find strength in talking about grief from a professional standpoint, I want you to know that her death totally took me apart at the seams. And so, the timeliness of this conversation, it kind of exposed my own need, right, to talk about grief and loss. So on that note, let's bring them in.
Let's.
All right.
All right.
Here they are.
So joining us tonight, we have the amazing Annette March Greer. Annette is the founder and director of Roberta's House. If you live in Baltimore, and probably if you live in the world, you know that Roberta's House is really the premier place where families go for support. They provide counseling, they provide ongoing support for young people who've lost family members. They just do extraordinary work. Annette, we're thrilled to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be with you all and speaking about such a needed topic. I am Annette March Greer, president of Roberta's House. And Roberta's House is a family grief support center located in Baltimore City and also in Prince George's County now. It was originated back in 2007. I come from a family of funeral service, March Funeral Homes, and I'm also a registered nurse, and recognize that grief related to the death of someone close, as well as the grief of so many other losses that people encounter, really had a traumatic impact on many children and adult lives. And there was a great need and resource for such as Roberta's House to provide education and grief support programs. And that's how we started.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Thank you. Anything more that you would like for me to share?
Well, so let me bring in also Lisa Malak,
Okay.
who Lisa is, again, someone who, if you live in Baltimore, you probably know Lisa. She is out and about all the time, has the needs of our children on her mind and on her heart 24/7. Lisa runs an organization formerly called No One Left Unhelped, now called Let's Thrive Baltimore. And Lisa has done exceptional work, particularly with children who have lost parents to violence. I met Lisa for the first time over in West Baltimore, where she and the students that she works with were doing a big community cleanup. And just to see the level of trust and comfort and really love that her students brought and shared with her was incredibly inspiring. And more recently, Lisa has been very much in the trenches, helping to close the digital divide. She's been out there giving out Google Fires to young people. When I needed a couple Google Fires for some young people, I called on Lisa. She got them right over. So Lisa, it is really a pleasure to have you with us here tonight as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm Lisa Moloch. I'm the CEO of Let's Thrive Baltimore, and I work with young people who's been impacted by violence and grief and also abuse. Thank you.
Good. I hope that you're going to introduce our third panelist.
All right, so our third panelist happens to be my dad. He is Dr. Lewis Cohen. He is a professor and psychiatrist in Springfield, Massachusetts. My dad's written several books. He is a gentleman and a scholar. He is also one of the nation's foremost experts on death and dying. And he spent much of his career working with folks on palliative care. My very, very first job when I was, I want to say 14, was as a field researcher for my dad. He had gotten a grant, I want to say from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, to work with folks who had kidney failure, who were on dialysis, who were heading toward the end of their life. And the study, and Dad, I apologize if I get this wrong, but I think the study was about introducing conversations, end-of-life conversations, and beginning to ask people if they were considering hospice, and providing them an opportunity to to begin the process of having end-of-life conversations. And I remember working for my dad, running around dialysis clinics, doing these interviews with people, and it was really, really, really powerful. So Dr. Lewis Cohen, welcome to Truth and Healing.
And thank you all for inviting me to Truth and Healing. The little introductory statement I kind of prepared, I've thrown out. I want to keep it personal and simply say that any of you who ever wonder about Zeke and his strangeness, shall we say, you may blame that on me. If you are impressed with his generosity and his love of community, you can hold his mother responsible for that part. At our breakfast, lunch, and dinner table, we would, often the subject was death. So I'd say we probably weren't the average family out there, but I'm thrilled at an opportunity to talk more about death on this show. So thanks, guys.
Great, thank you so much. So let's get right into it, shall we? Zeke, you good with that? All right, Annette, I think I want to start with you. I don't know if you heard from while you were in the waiting room, and I might have told you this previously, but I used to be a clinical director of a grieving program, and it mirrors Roberta's house. It's located in the Greater Toronto area, And so I am no stranger to this conversation, but I'd like it if we start with a definition of grief. Like, how would you describe grief?
Mm-hmm. Sure, thank you. Grief is a process of working through a loss. And that loss can be a physical loss or a loss of identity, any type of loss. And it is actually a healing process in which we all must go through. And it affects us emotionally, physically, and spiritually, and even socially. Um, and it is a normal human experience.
And can you talk a little bit, Annette, about the work that you all do at Roberta's House to help families, young people
Sure, sure. So
through the grieving process?
oftentimes, individuals or families suffer the death of someone close, and they find themselves very isolated. Their world has turned upside down. They may not be able to function. Children may not be able to concentrate in school, or they may be acting out. Oftentimes, the pain and suffering that people deal with leads to behaviors that can be unhealthy, or they just don't have the support systems in place to help them understand and to adapt to this big change in their lives. And we provide peer support groups where they come to the center and we come together as a family, we share a meal, and then we have trained volunteers who actually facilitate the programs where each age group breaks out into appropriate age groups. We have kiddos, middles, teens, and adults. And they're facilitated by trained volunteers that have gone through an extensive level of training and helping people to share their stories, to express their pain, to identify ways that they can adapt to this new change. And we have social workers who are also on staff who oversee these programs. And we have many different programs that family can actually participate in. We also have a camp. Of course, everything is virtual. This, now that COVID-19 has affected us all. But prior to this, we were all coming together physically. However, we're still conducting these groups now all virtually. And so we find that people are able to connect with each other, identify with each other in their suffering, or even, what they're experiencing in their grief experiences. And I think that is probably the greatest benefit, that people feel that they're not alone in what they're going through. And they're able to talk about it. And talking about it really allows people to process their experience and make meaning out of their experiences. And they get the support of having a listening ear, which is I think is probably the greatest therapy of all. And that's just the beginning, because we do so much at Roberta's House as far as workshops and bereavement ministry trainings to help churches also address, the grief that they're experiencing and how to care for the bereaved families.
I want to pick up right from where you left off in that idea of needing a listening ear. Mm-hmm. Lisa, when I think about your work with children who have lost parents, lost family members, often to violence, I think a lot of what you do is provide that listening ear and that support system, and someone who is consistent and who shows up and who's able to help young people process. Can you talk a little bit about your work with Let's Thrive Baltimore, and also some of the young people that you that you support and that you provide a listening ear to?
Yes, thank you. So Let's Thrive Baltimore. Again, we work with the children who's lost their parents to gun violence. And to piggyback a little bit off of what Annette said, for them to be together with other children who has experienced that same loss, that death in that family, which is one of the worstest trauma a child or anyone can go through when you lose someone, but violently. So being there for one another, and me just going through what they have went through and experiencing the same thing that they have, and just being there for them and safeguarding them and being consistent with them has really helped them. And what we do is we allow them to take that pain and turn it into action. And for me, it helped me to learn to cope with my trauma and my losses. Because myself, I scored a 9 on the ACE, which is the adverse childhood experience. I scored a 9, which you only can score up to a 10. So statistically, without the help that I've gotten to learn to cope with my trauma, I suppose I have all of these diseases and all of these things, which I don't. But a lot of people turn to substance abuse, alcohol. I've experienced all of that. I've been a victim of human trafficking. So I've been through a lot of trauma in my life. And for me to safeguard these children is I couldn't see myself doing anything else. I'm very passionate about it, and helping these children and seeing them advance to the next level and learning coping strategies to deal with their trauma, feeling better about themselves, not getting in trouble anymore. These are the children that people say, oh, we don't want them in our group, we don't want them around, but I don't give up on them. They're the children that I really want to help because no one else is helping them. They may be loud to people, or they may be this. And, I just don't give up on them. I show them a lot of love, and I just be there for them and jump in when there is help needed. I don't want to say I specifically do this or specifically do that. When the young people need help, I just like to jump in and be there for them, and be that ear, and be, and let them be each other's ear. We're like a family, like Annette said. We're like a family. We're not a group. We don't consider ourselves as a group. I'm the neighborhood auntie. They call me Aunt Lisa, So, and I like that because they're not looking at it as, okay, I got to go here. They looking at it like, when you're coming to get us, they're calling me. When are we having group? When are we doing things? It helps. And I've seen a lot of changes in the lives of the young people that we're working with.
Wow. Thank you so much for what you are offering to these young people. Annette said something about support systems and what you are doing with Thrive Baltimore. Did I get it right?
Let's Thrive Baltimore.
Let's Thrive Baltimore. Yeah. You have certainly established a support system. So thank you for that. Zeke's dad, I want to pivot to you. So your work is around death, the dreaded D word, and dying with dignity. Talk to us about what that means, and help us understand how the support systems kind of shift in this dynamic, because we're talking about supporting the person who is choosing to die with dignity if they have that opportunity to choose. So talk to us about that.
Okay, I'll, if you don't mind, I'll work my way around to it, but I'll start with something that Zeke wasn't planning on hearing, because it's a long time since I spoke to it. My very first experience professionally working with people who had been bereaved, in some ways was the inverse of what Lisa has been talking about. It wasn't a case of children who've lost parents, but the other way around. I set up a clinic in Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn when I was in training for parents who had stillbirths and neonatal deaths, babies that died in the first day or so of life. And then later on, I became interested in sudden infant death. And what I found was that until we started doing this, and we're talking back in the 1970s, the parents, and when I say parents, I'm really talking mothers, because these were by and large single mothers who had had kids and who had died during the course of the delivery. were treated exactly the same as if they had given birth to living kids. And kind of the richness of what I'm hearing today from both of the speakers is that unless we sort of give ourselves a nudge and recognize all the different kinds of deaths that can happen out there, we can sort of let our denial of them take over, and we can sort of avoid giving them the due that they really need. In the case of the mothers whose babies died, I thought minimally what they needed was to be treated differently, to be allowed a chance to see those dead babies, to take a picture with them, to have some sort of memorabilia that they could grieve with, including, in hospitals, they often used to do footprints of the newborn baby to keep it identified. And we'd make sure that the nurses would bring that baby over, would bring material over. And then afterwards, I would meet with them a few weeks later to go over an autopsy report that was done on the baby, so that if there was something to be learned, that they could bring forward towards further births, if they were able to get pregnant again, they were armed with some knowledge from the experience. So if you will, that's the kind of roots, and that precedes Zeke coming on the scene.
Most certainly. You said the 70s, right? So
yes.
And I appreciate you for sharing that, because it does describe some of the losses that happen here in Baltimore City. So there's a term called disenfranchised grief. And this is the grief where people's grief isn't recognized by the larger society. And so, people who have experienced the loss of a child, be it through miscarriage, or if it was a stillbirth, or certainly the gun violence, it's just not seen in the same way. And so therefore, the grief journey that those people go through is disenfranchised. So thank you for bringing that up. I'll let you continue.
Good. I mean, I'll just sort of swing from where you're going and say, when you brought up, and Zeke had brought up earlier about death with dignity, here's a type of death that also we can't easily wrap ourselves around unless we think about that there might actually be some people who welcome death, who are experiencing fate worse than death, and who death may make sense to them as a means of relieving their suffering and sort of acknowledging that they have come to the end of what they've considered to be the meaningful portion of their lives. And again, it's not the kind of death that one would think you would think of if you were sort of listing the different kinds of ways that people die. But it is a death, and it's an interesting one because families grieve and mourn when that happens, when they are helped to die. But they also exult in a way that some of these other deaths don't allow, because they know that the person had come to the end of their suffering and had been allowed to have what they wanted.
If I might add to that, I can appreciate you sharing that, because one reality that we oftentimes don't think about is, that death does come in all forms, in all ways, and to all ages. There's no, limit as to how death may come to a family member or to an individual. And it affects one's grief and the way they grieve. Someone who dies of a violent death or even an unexpected death can be much more traumatic than someone who is, peacefully wanting and allowed to die with family around them. Everyone's grief and personality is different as well, and attachments to individuals all plays a role in how individuals grieve. But, oftentimes, sometimes I think some people do deny or don't realize that death does come in all ages, like in infants and small babies. We have a program called Project Hope for moms who've had miscarriages and infant losses. And it's very, very important that they find support because, as you said, disenfranchised grief, that simply means that people are not, people think that because the child only lived for 6 days that they shouldn't be grieving, or they shouldn't feel a loss. But that is absolutely a false belief. Mothers, have to grieve over all the dreams that they had for that child for the future. And every birthday that comes around, that mother will still think about the child that, would have been born. So grieving and the type of death also plays a big role, how the individual grieves.
Absolutely. And I just want to add to that and say that, I can understand what you're saying because you have people who are suffering, who are in great pain, and they don't want to suffer any longer. And, they should have the option, if they don't want to be. It's hard to say, and people may be hurt from them leaving. But true, if they have this horrible disease and it's nothing that the doctors can do, and they're just in so much pain and they just can't take it anymore, I believe that they should have the right, to leave here if that's what they choose to do.
Lisa, Annette, can I ask you about COVID deaths or deaths in the time of COVID? Because I imagine both of you are coming in contact with that and with the grief that follows.
Yes.
Well, I've had a couple. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Annette.
No, please. You
okay.
First.
No. So I have had a couple family members who's tested positive from COVID-19. I haven't known anyone who's actually died. I do believe I do know someone who died from COVID-19, but not sure. That's their personal, and maybe the family is not exposing it. But I do know a couple families that I work with who's the parents, no children that I know of, but some parents of some of the children that I've worked with has confided in me that they have tested positive for COVID. So, I just pray with them and, I let them know they can make it through, just be strong and, just try to encourage the family as a whole.
Well, since the pandemic, Roberta's House, in fact, we just started a COVID support group. And it does complicate the grief for the mere fact that loved ones have died alone and family members were not able to be there with their loved ones when they were dying. Which really brings about a lot of regret, guilt, and just the imagination really wonders to think about how their loved one felt and was thinking dying alone. The fact that people can't attend the funerals, the funeral numbers of attendance are limited. I remember hearing one family say that, mom had 10 children and only 10 people were limited to attend a funeral service in the very beginning. And it was just very, very hard for family members to pick and choose who could attend and who couldn't. And in the African American community, rituals and ceremonies is a very important part of our healing and community. And it was, very, very difficult. Many funeral homes were simulcasting or streaming funerals so that others could at least see the services. I mean, it was really getting to a point where, the funeral homes were dealing with a lot of people who were really becoming irate and angry because, this is my mom. I want to see my mom and I want to spend time with my mom now because I didn't. So it really complicated the grief and will complicate grief, people who are grieving over COVID-19.
Annette, I want to pick up from there because I went to a Zoom funeral. A friend of mine, his mother passed away, and it was interesting. I mean, it was people from all over the world that were able to be there and to be part of um, the ceremony. It was a Jewish family, and so on the one hand, it was it's good to be able to at least have that space, but it was
Right.
really, really painful. And you
Yes.
could tell there was this sense of not only the loss of my friend's mother, but the loss of being able to physically connect in
Yes.
that moment and have everybody together. And, grieving is also a big part of the Jewish tradition and the mourner's Kaddish. And it was really painful and I just felt tragically sad for my friend because I know that he wanted to have that sense of connection with all of his relatives and all of his friends, and to kind of have to do it in this stilted, kind of awkward, looking at a computer screen mode that we're in, I think to your point, further complicated complex grief.
Yes, definitely.
And that's a hard thing.
I can't imagine not being able to be with my child or my husband or my mother or my father in their last hours. I think I would probably lose it as well. So many people are suffering with this type of loss right now, and it's heartbreaking.
Well, I just experienced it myself. My niece was actually murdered a couple months ago, and it was during COVID. And we weren't able to go in the funeral home, like you said, no more than 10. And it was heartbreaking. And, and then we had to pick and choose who could be at the burial ground. We had to separate in groups there, and you're already grieving. She was shot in the head. She was 27. And my sister, actually, I've referred her to you, Miss Annette, as well as she goes to see my therapist, but she also sees a therapist there with you at Roberta's house. And just to be around more mothers who's experiencing what she's going through. And like I told her, I want you, she's looking for me for answers, and I'm giving her what I got. But I said, go there, because Roberta House can actually offer you services to help you. You'll be around other mothers, who's experiencing what you're going through. But we just went through that, and it was really difficult. It was difficult from beginning to end, just not even being able to go in a hospital to say goodbye, it was a lot. We're all in a parking lot crying, of John Hopkins parking lot. So that's pretty true.
And, one thing what is unfortunate too, here in Baltimore, because of the homicides and people who are also dying, I don't know if it's a such thing as saying prematurely, but because of poor health or COVID-19. And then we still have the violence going on in our communities. And then we still have overdoses. People I'm finding who are coming to Roberta's house just aren't experiencing one death, but they're experiencing multiple deaths of family members and neighbors and friends. And it's becoming very overwhelming. And it's affecting, their
recovery.
Health. Yes, their recovery and their health. Yes. COVID-19 is enough to scare us all anyway. But then when we're seeing everybody around us die, it just becomes too much for so many individuals, and it begins to affect their sleeping patterns and their eating. And, I think domestic violence is on the rise in our communities as well. This is a very critical time in our
And I
during
just
these
want to say,
days.
yeah, and that's why I want to thank Zeke for the Healing City, Baltimore, and everything that Zeke is doing to
Yes.
make Baltimore a healing city. We
Hmm.
need more people like Zeke who's really not just talking about it, but getting the work done. So I am just honored to have him, even though I'm not in his district. We do a lot of work together. Um, I'm willing to do work in his district because I just really, really, not to put anyone else there, but I love Zeke and I love the work because of the work that he's doing. He really care about Baltimore City. So I put him on a high pedestal, no matter who I'm having this conversation with, because he's making a difference. He's creating bills that's creating change for the people and the lives of the people that I'm working with. Every day, these children are going through trauma. He has the Healing City, Baltimore. These children that I'm working with didn't have digital devices. He wrote a bill to be able to allocate $3 million and pushed it through the council chambers to have this done.
Awesome.
So,
Awesome.
I just want to thank him for all of this that you're doing for Baltimore and even in communities that you don't live in or work in. It affects the Baltimore city as a whole. So thank you, Z.
Well,
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, I appreciate you, Lisa. And I will just say that, it is really, really, really about us, not about me. None of the work is possible without you on the ground really being the voice for so many who often don't have a voice. Of course, folks like Annette who have been doing the work for, and sort of blazing the path for many of us who are in it. And now, of course, my good friend and colleague, Dr. Buckley, who, without her, the Healing City, when we went over to Coppin State and signed the bill, it just would have looked very different. So I really think it is about us together as a city. And just, having spaces like this one to be able to have difficult, frank, at times painful conversations. That to me, that is the work, and we each have our own lane. But what's beautiful about it, just like tonight, is when we're able to come together and share in it. And again, not about me, but just about how do we move our city forward together.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Z.
So, what I really, really appreciate, as each of you are talking, I'm thinking to myself, man, this couldn't have come together any better, because grief is everything. You know what I mean? Like, there are so many different types of things that we grieve, and as we stated earlier, we all grieve differently. And I think that dignity piece is something that I want to spend a little bit more time talking about what death and dignity looks like. So, Zeke's dad, can you give us some more about that?
Well, I think we all have a pretty decent idea as to what an ideal death would be, and it's probably a little bit different for each of us. But I think the basic shape is something that we can all agree to, which is that in the fullness of time, having lived our lives, having formed a personality and accomplished whatever we were going to accomplish, including having kids and having people who love us, that we don't have a death that is especially painful, entails a lot of suffering, seems to needlessly go on and on and on, and is one that, when it does come, comes with us having reached some sort of resolution, some sort of peace with those who we love. And that often, in the ideal world, would mean having our families around us. So all to me at least, and I've actually studied some of these aspects. Those are the features that jump out for people when they talk about a dignified death or the kind of death that they would want to have. I don't know if others feel want to add any attributes to it or feel any differently about it. God comes into this because a lot of us want to feel as if our time has come in a way that sort of makes sense in a sort of a more spiritual kind of a fashion. But others want to speak to this as well?
Yeah, I can just add that I can agree that I believe that everyone will want their family, and will want to go in a peaceful way. Me, myself, I want to go an old lady warm in my bed, So, you know what I mean? So I don't, I think we all, it's hard to talk about that, you know what I mean? But it's the reality, people are dying in record numbers. So we must begin to talk about that. And we must prepare, like when my mom brings up, okay, we have to prepare and things like that. It's a little hurtful, but we do it, We have to prepare for that because you don't want to be left in limbo and everybody's trying to figure out what to do and who's going to do it. So you have to have that conversation. And I think we need to have more of it, within our African-American families, because we're majority of the time, I love my people, but we're always don't have funeral money or we don't have. So we're having that conversation and we're preparing that we'll have that, And I'm a firm believer, wanted to say this because y'all know I speak my little mind. If we can buy cell phone insurance, we can buy life insurance, And I just had to put that out there while we was talking about it because we must we have to get that life insurance, that's for everyone.
Let me throw out something if I can, a little fact, which is in the African-American community, within the next 10 years, there's going to be a doubling of the 65-year-old and older segment of the population, which is to say there's going to be an enormous number of us who have gray hair.
That's
we're
good.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
And, I don't think that a lot of older folk are familiar with having the kind of conversations you're talking about. They put them off and they put them off. And I certainly see among young doctors more of a willingness to talk about it than the older doctors did. And I wonder the younger folk that you encounter, whether they are more willing and whether they ought to start nudging some of these older folk to not only have the life insurance, but to talk about what their wishes are when things get hairy and they may end up in hospital.
I might have that conversation with them. That's something that we've never talked about, but that is something to talk about because they move us now. Them young people, they know how to get us to move. Yeah. So you're absolutely correct by having the conversations with the children because they be having me wrapped around their little fingers. So I can imagine how they have their parents. When my son asked me to do something, just like me before, I was just bringing this up for an example, how I was ashamed of my past and my story at one time. And my son, he's the one that got me talking about it because he was like, Ma, if they can't accept you for who you are, you don't need them around. And then I began speaking and talking to other women and the children and everybody about the things that I've been through because my son put it in my head and I'm like, you know what, you're right. Mm-hmm. So talking to the kids about it, you can tell you're a psychiatrist because you're absolutely correct. They help us adults to kind of see things clear. So that's a conversation I'm willing to have with somebody. If
I might say, as painful and as much as death is, we oftentimes want to avoid it, but it really is a teacher of life. I am very unique in the fact that I grew up living on the second floor of a funeral parlor until I was the age of 21. And so the funeral home was a place where, you know, death was all around, every place. And I have to say that growing up in this environment made me very curious, but also very appreciative of life. And it also made me realize one thing I do realize today is that I know I'm only going to be here for a certain time. And I want to maximize that time as much as I can, knowing that I'm only going to be here for a certain allotted time. And I know it's difficult for young people to think that way right now. It was probably I probably didn't think that way when I was very young. I thought about death. I saw death, and I knew that I had a purpose here on this earth. And if we could help more of our young people to see that they each have a purpose here on this earth, that they were created purposefully, and that, you know, and that please don't live life as if, you know, it has no meaning, no matter what you're going through. No, just like Lisa, as you told your story, you know, you may have went through a lot of traumatic experiences, but you allowed those experiences to eventually blossom into something that allowed you to reach out and help someone else. It became part of your growth. It became part of who you are, because if you didn't have this past experience, you wouldn't be able to help the many. You're right. You wouldn't be able to relate to all of the children and the other people young people who are going through those same similar things. So you have a purpose for this, and it wasn't purposeless that you had to go through all of that. And that's what I think we try to teach our young people at Roberta's house, that life may have dealt you a bad hand, but, you know, I apologize for the sound in the background, but life may have dealt you a hand that, you know, was unfair or not just, but you still have the power to change. That does not have to define who you are.
Who you are. I say that all the time.
Yes, it does not have to define.
From victim to victor. I don't want people to feel sorry for me, like of my life experience. I went from a victim to victor, and I am saving lives with my pain. I turned it into passion.
That's right. That's right.
And I'm excited. You know, I don't have no regrets at all. Like, I have no regrets, because it made me into who I am. And again, we teach our young people to have a conscience, and that there's actions behind their behavior, because a lot of young people, they are challenged, you know, in our community in Baltimore City. I'm from West Baltimore, 21217, born and raised where Freddie Gray died, you know. That's my community. I know everybody in that community. And a I of us, we failed our youth. And that's another thing. I had nobody to turn to. I had nobody to lean on. There was no Roberta's house. There was no Let's Thrive Baltimore. I'm 45 years old. There was none of that in my time. So I had no one to lean on, no one to turn to. So as we grew up, we hurt the people that came up behind us. And this is why our children has experienced so much trauma, because as parents, and a lot of us were parents at a young age, we weren't teaching our children discipline and guidance. So now they suffer with all these challenges because we failed them, you know.
So Lisa, to that point, we spent the last couple of minutes talking about youth, and one of the questions that was posed was specifically related to youth. So I want to ask you guys the question, you know, when we see certain behaviors in young people, sometimes, you know, we say, oh, you know, he's bad, she's fast, this and that and the other. But we don't understand that some of the behaviors that we're seeing are actually expressions of grief.
Yeah, and that's what happens. Yeah.
Anger.
Absolutely correct about that.
Yeah.
So tell us, like, what kinds of signs should we be aware of when, especially in the case of a young person who has lost someone, what signs are there that we should be
Wetting the
looking?
bed, being disobedient, acting up in school, getting into
Withdrawal.
fights, abuse, being aggressive, using drugs at a young age, smoking marijuana, not too much drinking in the young people these days, but a lot of smoking.
Even getting involved in gangs.
And gangs, looking for love in the wrong places, going to the streets,
Yes.
being easily groomed by the drug dealers. They pull on them because they see their vulnerabilities. So what happens is that the drug dealers pulls on these young boys and girls or the boys, and they try to get them, and they're easily misled. Yeah, but and only the girls, they're in the malls, they stealing, they're out doing, you know what I mean? All of these different things, you know, that I've been through and that I've done. You know, I was in the mall stealing and, you know, doing all of these things. And I see it. They're traumatized.
Definitely. And
They're
you
traumatized.
said withdrawal. So give us a little bit more about that.
Well, sometimes young people will stop doing the things that they used to do. They won't reach out to their friends anymore. They might be experiencing depression. They can even become suicidal. They can, you know, one thing that grief attacks is the self-esteem and the self-worth. And it doesn't have to be grief over the death of someone. It could be that, you know, my mother's not in my life. I'm not worthy. I'm not valuable. You know, my father doesn't care about me. It doesn't have to be over the death. And this grief can just pile up. This, you know, these losses can pile up and really destroy the youth, and they lose their identity in this process.
Definitely.
So
I hear a lot of young people saying, I don't know who I am.
Yes.
I need to find myself. You know what I mean? Thank you for helping me find out who I really was, because I wasn't sure. So I hear that a lot. Like I didn't know how to act or how to talk or what to wear. You know what I mean? Now I feel like I can just be me. I can come out and put on whatever I want, you know, and I tell the other young people, that's another thing. You have to educate the young people not to hurt other young people, because a lot of young people that do commit suicide or is suicidal, they're doing that as well from the trauma, but because they're being hurt by their peers. Their peers are not embracing them. So, you know, encouraging them to just be there for one another and support one another and be an ear and not go and tell everyone else if someone's confiding to you, you know, about something personal, because that can cause a young person to commit suicide. I've had young people call me and say, Miss Lisa or Aunt Lisa, I want to kill myself. And I'm like, what? Wait, I'm on my way, you know, calling their parents, like getting there, getting them to the hospital, talking to them, or maybe just speaking to them, calming them down if they haven't had a plan to do it, you know, calling my counselors that I have working with, you know, that I refer my people to, and getting them to the youth, you know, because I make sure that all of my youth are in grief counseling as well. We partner with Sarah's House, and they send therapists to the homes of the children, because a lot of our children don't drive, right? And their parents don't. You know, sometimes if you come and get them or you come to them, they'll do it, you know.
And I think, Lisa, that's a piece that in my lifetime has, I think, gotten worse for young people, which is that when I was growing up, you know, we had bullying, as I'm sure we all did, but you know, you would go home at 3:00 and then you would go play kickball, or you would do whatever it is you did. That's pretty much the end of it until the next day. Whereas now with social media, with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, there's just this whole world of nonstop bullying that I think a lot of our young people are subject to. And even older people, we had a conversation with some of the folks from Safe Streets, and one of the things that they've told me is that so many of the beefs that escalate into violence and tragically result in someone getting shot and in homicide start from social media, from something that gets said on someone's Facebook,
Instagram or Twitter.
Instagram, and then it blows up and it becomes this whole another thing. And, I just think that is one of these really dark parts of social media that our children have now been exposed to, that we haven't even fully unpacked or understood. Because even when I taught in West Baltimore middle school, the level of bullying and internet harassment was just off the hook. And I think, unfortunately, has only gotten worse since then.
So true.
And cyberbullying, a lot of cyberbullying leads to suicide. And children are killing themselves because they're being bullied on the internet, and they're exposed. But see, we need to teach our young people not to expose vulnerabilities on the internet. That's where it starts. They expose their vulnerabilities, and then they're attacked. So if we're teaching them not to expose their vulnerabilities, it's a less of a chance of them being bullied on social media, because you have the predators that look for that, or cyber bullies that look for vulnerabilities, and then they jump in and attack.
Which is kind of why social media has its drawbacks as a place for somebody who's grieving.
Absolutely.
Because I think grieving takes place best when it's when you are able to express it to another human being and not just sort of send out this electronic signal, which people can take and hear it the way they want to and for their own purposes. And if anything, what social media does is give the bullies, give the people an opportunity to not hear the pain that a person is in, but it just sort of unleashes something else entirely.
You all have given us so much, and I wish that we had more time. In all sincerity, we want to be sure that we end tonight's show with some resources. We've talked about suicide, and so we want to make sure that people know that they can call 24/7. They can call the National Suicide Hotline, and that number is 1-800-273-8255. 24/7. You can call that number and you can get help. Annette, you have some resources, and Lisa, you may have some resources that you would like to share as well.
Sure. So Roberta's House, of course, you can visit our website at robertashouse.org. We have programs that will be starting very soon for all ages. In fact, we have Camp Aaron, which is a virtual camp this August 13th, 14th, and 15th coming up. We're still open for registration for that. Kids from 6 to 17 years of age, which is Camp in a Box. We'll be conducting that. And we have drop-in groups for homicide survivors. We have the COVID-19 support group. You can call us at 410-235-6633. Shout for help. It is so important. A couple of things just in the grief process. One is it's so important to talk with someone that helps you to process and make meaning out of your experiences and find some healthy coping skills, which is so important. So please reach out for help. You have a right to feel the way you feel. Please.
Yes, please get with a group, whether it's Roberta's House, Let's Thrive Baltimore. Get with a group, get with a support group, get with some people that can work with you. Talk to your family. Family needs to be involved. So not only do we work with the children, but Let's Thrive Baltimore works with the whole family, because the healing, we can't help the children heal if we can't help the whole family heal. So please call us at 443-625-7720. Again, that's 443-625-7720, or you can go to let'sthrivebaltimore.org. Again, that's let'sthrivebaltimore.org. With young people, 5 days a week. We're still working in the community. We're on the front line serving food 5 days a week. at 1911 North Payson Street. We're doing produce every Monday. We are here for you. If you need support, please, you'll reach me personally on the Let's Chat on our website. I respond right away. Just reach out for help. We are here for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Zeke and Melissa, for having me here.
You know, my takeaways from our time tonight are simple. First and foremost, we want folks to know you are not alone. Even though grief can feel very isolating, you are not alone. And you have the right to make meaning of your loss and of your grief. And so you should connect with people who love and care for you. And also take it a step further and get the help from resources such as Let's Thrive Baltimore and Roberta's House. And we have the right to grieve with dignity, and people also have the right to die with dignity. And so I just want to thank you all for being here with us this evening. Thank you for the information that you shared and for the very sensitive way in which you shared it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and again, thank you all so much. I want to just close out on something I heard Lisa say, which was that she was able to turn her pain into passion, which is also something that one of my late great mentors, Congressman Elijah Cummings, used to say as well. He would say, turn your pain into passion and then into purpose. And he was a tremendous proponent for death with dignity, as my dad knows. And he was also a seminal figure in our work around trauma, and that he called many of us in Baltimore together and really led the work at the national level. And I think that, this conversation and a lot of what we get to do is part of his legacy as well. So with that, again, want to thank Annette, Lisa, Zeke's dad,
Yes.
Dr. Buckley.
Yes.
Really, really appreciate all of you for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes.
Thank you for the great work that you all are doing in this city.
All right. Zeke is the man with the plan. Have a nice one.